Blood trickled down Jamal Thompson's chin as the flight attendant towered over the 12-year-old. Problem solved, she smirked, walking away. Nobody moved, except one man, quietly capturing everything on his phone. Judge Terrence Washington hadn't planned on becoming this child's unexpected savior today. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories of justice being served against racial discrimination. Trust me, you won't believe how this flight attendant's career comes crashing down after what she did to young Jamal. The Thompson family had been planning this trip for 3 years. Letitia Thompson, a dedicated nurse at Mercy Hospital, had worked double shifts and holidays, saving every extra penny for this moment. Her children, 12-year-old Jamal and 8-year-old Zora, had never been on an airplane before, let alone visited Disney World. This was supposed to be the vacation of their dreams. "Mom, are we really going to fly in the sky today?" Zora asked, her eyes wide with wonder as they waited at the boarding gate. Her small hands clutched a well-loved Princess Tiana doll, her favorite Disney character. Jamal tried to act cool, but Letitia could see the nervous excitement in his eyes. At 12, he was at that age where he wanted to appear grown-up while still being very much a child. Tall for his age, with bright, intelligent eyes and a smile that could light up a room, Jamal had always been her sensitive one. He had been researching airplanes for weeks, memorizing facts about altitude and air pressure to calm his nerves. "Yes, baby. We're really going to fly today," Letitia assured her daughter, squeezing Jamal's shoulder. "And Jamal here knows everything about airplanes, don't you, son?" Jamal nodded, puffing his chest out slightly. "Did you know that most commercial airplanes fly at 35,000 feet? That's like 66 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other." "Wow!" Zora gasped, properly impressed. Letitia smiled, her heart full. This trip had cost them more than money. She'd missed school plays, parent-teacher conferences, and countless bedtime stories. But seeing her children's excitement made every sacrifice worth it. As they boarded Atlantic Skyways Flight 1382 to Orlando, Letitia couldn't help but notice how the flight attendant's smile disappeared when their boarding passes were scanned. Stephanie Donovan had been a flight attendant for 15 years, and she no longer bothered hiding her biases. The airline industry had changed, she often complained to colleagues. Too many budget travelers. Too many people who didn't understand proper airplane etiquette. Too many families with unruly children. But underneath these complaints lay something darker, something she kept slightly more hidden, though it influenced every interaction she had with passengers who didn't fit her preferred demographic. "Row 23, toward the back," she said curtly, barely looking at Letitia or her children. The Thompsons made their way down the narrow aisle, careful not to bump into seated passengers. When they reached their seats, Letitia helped Zora with her seatbelt before settling Jamal by the window, his preferred spot. "Look at those machines moving our luggage." Jamal pointed excitedly. His face pressed against the small oval window. "They're called ground support equipment. They can lift over 2,000 pounds at once." 2 rows ahead and across the aisle, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s glanced back at Jamal's enthusiastic commentary. Judge Terrence Washington smiled slightly, remembering when his own children had been that age. Now in his 32nd year on the federal bench, Washington was heading to Orlando for the National Conference of Federal Judges. He hadn't expected to be seated in economy class, an administrative error had canceled his first-class reservation, but he wasn't one to make a fuss about such things. As the boarding continued, Judge Washington noticed something odd. The same flight attendant who had been curt with the Thompson family was warmly welcoming white passengers, offering to help store luggage and providing pre-flight beverages to those in the first few rows. 30 minutes after takeoff, drink service began. Stephanie and another flight attendant named Marcus worked their way down the aisles with the beverage cart. Judge Washington observed as they served the first 15 rows, including his. He requested a simple water and received it with a professional smile from Stephanie. But when the cart passed the Thompson family, it continued to the next row without stopping. "Excuse me, miss?" Jamal raised his hand politely, the way he'd been taught to address adults. "I think you forgot us." Stephanie turned, her smile instantly vanishing. "We'll come back," she said, before turning away. But they didn't come back. The cart completed the service and returned to the galley. Letitia noticed her children watching other passengers enjoying their drinks. "It's okay," she whispered to Jamal, who looked confused. "I brought some juice boxes in my carry-on. We don't need their drinks." "But why didn't they stop for us, Mom?" Jamal persisted. "They stopped for everyone else." "Sometimes people forget," Letitia said, though she knew perfectly well what was happening. It wasn't the first time. She just hoped to shield her children from this reality for a little longer. When Marcus passed by their row again, Letitia gently stopped him. "Excuse me, could we please get some water for my children?" Marcus looked apologetic. "Of course, ma'am. I'm sorry about that. I'll be right back." A few minutes later, Stephanie returned instead of Marcus, carrying 3 plastic cups with minimal water, no ice. She practically dropped them on their tray tables, sloshing water over the sides. "There," she said flatly. "Thank you," Letitia replied calmly, though her heart raced with a familiar anger. "But could we possibly get some napkins for the spill?" Stephanie's eyes narrowed slightly. "We're running low on supplies. Use what you have." As she walked away, Judge Washington's attention was fully captured. He'd seen this behavior before, the selective service, the minimal compliance, the thinly veiled contempt. It was the kind of discrimination that happened countless times daily across America, small enough to be dismissed by those who didn't experience it but significant enough to remind those who did that they were seen as less than. He discreetly took out his phone, opened the note-taking app, and began documenting what he'd observed. 32 years on the bench had taught him the importance of contemporaneous notes, especially when something didn't feel right. The seatbelt sign flashed on with a soft ding as the captain's voice crackled through the cabin. "Folks, we're expecting some turbulence as we pass through this weather system. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin and return to your seats." Letitia immediately checked that both Jamal and Zora had their seatbelts fastened securely. Zora clutched her Princess Tiana doll tighter, her eyes wide with concern. "Is the plane going to crash?" she whispered. "No, sweetie," Letitia assured her. "It's just like driving over a bumpy road. The pilot knows exactly what to do." Jamal, who had been researching airplanes for weeks before their trip, added confidently, "Planes are made to handle turbulence. The wings can actually bend up to 15 feet without breaking." The first jolt came without warning. The entire aircraft dropped suddenly before stabilizing. Several passengers gasped. Zora let out a small squeal, grabbing her mother's arm. "It's okay, baby," Letitia soothed, though her own knuckles were white against the armrest. The plane shuddered again, more violently this time. Jamal's cup of water, which had been resting on his tray table, tipped over, spilling onto his lap and the aisle floor. "Oh no," he exclaimed, trying to catch the cup as it rolled away. Letitia reached for the few cocktail napkins they had, quickly dabbing at Jamal's soaked pants. "What is going on back here?" Stephanie's sharp voice cut through the cabin noise as she appeared beside their row, seemingly materializing despite the seatbelt sign. "I'm sorry," Jamal said immediately. "The plane moved, and my water spilled." Stephanie's eyes narrowed at the puddle on the floor. "This is a safety hazard. Someone could slip and get hurt. We're trying to clean it up," Letitia explained, showing the soaked napkins. "Do you have any more napkins we could use?" "You should have secured your items properly," Stephanie said loudly, ignoring Letitia's request. "This is exactly why we give safety instructions at the beginning of each flight. Did you not listen to them?" Her voice carried across several rows, drawing unwanted attention from nearby passengers. Jamal's face flushed with embarrassment. It was an accident, Letitia said, keeping her voice measured and calm, though her heart raced. The turbulence. Everyone else managed to keep their beverages on their tray tables. Stephanie interrupted, gesturing around at the other passengers. Your son needs to be more careful. A few rows ahead, Judge Washington listened to the exchange with growing concern. The disparity in treatment was becoming impossible to ignore. He had seen at least 3 other spills during the turbulence, including one in first class, where the flight attendants had responded with extra napkins and offers to replace the beverages. He discreetly pulled out his phone and, making sure the device was in airplane mode, began recording video. My son is 12 years old, Letitia said, her voice still controlled but with an edge of maternal protection. And he apologized for the accident. We'd appreciate some help cleaning it up. Stephanie's posture stiffened. Are you causing a disturbance on this flight, ma'am? Because I need to remind you that interfering with a flight crew member's duties is a federal offense. The threat hung in the air. Letitia felt her mouth go dry. As a black woman, she knew exactly how quickly situations like this could escalate, how easily she could be labeled as aggressive or non-compliant. She'd seen the viral videos, read the stories. She thought of her children watching, learning. No disturbance, she said quietly. We'll handle it ourselves. Jamal looked at his mother, confusion and hurt in his eyes. He'd never seen her back down like this before. At school, when a teacher had made racially insensitive comments about his science project on famous black inventors, Letitia had scheduled a meeting with the principal and calmly but firmly addressed the situation. She'd always taught him to stand up for himself with respect and dignity. But here, 35,000 feet in the air, the power dynamics were different. Letitia could feel it, and it made her sick to her stomach. Mom, Jamal whispered after Stephanie finally walked away without providing any napkins, why was she so mean about an accident? When the lady in the blue dress up front spilled her drink, the other flight attendant gave her a whole stack of napkins and a new drink. Letitia's heart broke a little. She'd tried so hard to protect her children from these moments, to preserve their innocence and confidence a little longer. But Jamal was observant, always had been. Some people, she began carefully, treat others differently based on how they look. It's wrong, but it happens. What matters is how we respond, with dignity, always. But it's not fair, Jamal insisted, his voice rising slightly. Lower your voice, honey, Letitia cautioned. You're right, it's not fair. And there are times to stand up against unfairness. But right now, on this plane, we need to be strategic. We'll get to Disney World, have an amazing time, and not let anyone ruin our special trip. An older white woman across the aisle leaned over. You should teach your children to be more respectful to authorities, she said in a stage whisper. That flight attendant is just doing her job. Letitia didn't respond, giving the woman a brief, tight smile before turning back to her children. But the comment stung, reinforcing the unfair burden she carried, not just experiencing discrimination but being expected to accept it gracefully. Judge Washington continued recording discreetly. In his 3 decades on the bench, he presided over numerous civil rights cases, but witnessing this firsthand, away from the formality of his courtroom, hit differently. He made a mental note to request the passenger manifest later. Names would be important. Over the next hour, the pattern continued. When refreshments were served again, the cart rolled past the Thompson family without stopping. When Letitia politely asked for pretzels for her hungry children, Stephanie responded that they had run out, despite visibly serving another passenger the same snack minutes later. The microaggressions mounted. Stephanie's refusal to make eye contact with Letitia, the exaggerated sighs when Jamal asked a question, the warm smiles reserved for white passengers contrasted with the cold efficiency directed at the Thompsons. For Jamal, this treatment brought back painful memories from school. Last year, in 6th grade, he'd been the only black student selected for the advanced math program. His teacher, Mr. Bennett, had suggested in front of the class that perhaps Jamal had been included for diversity reasons, rather than merit, despite Jamal having the highest test scores in the grade. When Jamal had excelled in the program, consistently outperforming his peers, the teacher attributed it to natural athletic ability with numbers, rather than intelligence or hard work. Letitia had addressed that situation through proper channels, meeting with administrators and requesting a different teacher. But here, in this sealed metal tube hurtling through the sky, there were no channels to pursue, no managers to speak with, no way to remove her family from the situation. She fought an internal battle familiar to many black parents: stand up now and risk escalation that could traumatize her children and potentially lead to worse outcomes, or absorb the indignity temporarily to protect them, teaching resilience while acknowledging the unfairness later. For now, she chose the latter, whispering reassurances to her increasingly upset children, promising Disney magic just hours away. But with each passing minute, the tension in row 23 grew thicker, a pressure building toward an inevitable breaking point. 3 hours into the 5-hour flight, 8-year-old Zora tugged urgently at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice tight with discomfort, "I really need to go to the bathroom." Letitia glanced toward the rear of the aircraft. The seatbelt sign had been turned off 20 minutes ago after the turbulence subsided. The rear lavatory showed a vacant sign. "Okay, sweetie. Let's go quickly." She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood to let Zora out into the aisle. As they started toward the rear lavatory, Stephanie appeared, blocking their path with the beverage cart. "You need to return to your seats," she said firmly. "We're starting another service." "My daughter needs to use the restroom urgently," Letitia explained, noting Zora's increasingly distressed expression as she shifted from foot to foot. "The sign shows it's vacant." "We'll be quick." Stephanie's expression hardened. "The lavatory is closed for cleaning." Letitia glanced at the indicator again. Still showing vacant, not occupied or cleaning. "Please," she said quietly, aware of the eyes watching from surrounding rows. "She's 8. It's an emergency." "Use the forward lavatory," Stephanie replied dismissively, though it was 15 rows away, with the cart now blocking access. "How are we supposed to get there with the cart in the way?" Letitia asked, struggling to keep frustration from her voice. "You'll have to wait until we complete this service," Stephanie said with finality, turning her attention to serving another passenger. Zora whimpered softly, clutching her mother's hand. Letitia looked around desperately and spotted another flight attendant, Marcus, emerging from the forward cabin. "Excuse me," she called to him, waving slightly. "Could you help us? My daughter needs the bathroom urgently, but we can't get past the cart." Marcus approached, taking in the situation quickly. "Of course, ma'am. You can use the forward lavatory. I'll escort you." Stephanie shot him a look that could freeze fire. "I already told them to wait until we finish the service," she said through clenched teeth. "It's a child," Marcus replied quietly. "It's not a problem." "It's my section," Stephanie insisted. "I've made my decision." During this exchange, Zora's discomfort had become unbearable. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Mommy, I can't hold it anymore." Jamal, witnessing his sister's distress from his seat, made a decision. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. "I'm going to help my sister," he announced, moving into the aisle to join his mother and Zora. As he stepped forward, the plane encountered a brief moment of light turbulence. Jamal, still unaccustomed to maintaining balance during flight, stumbled slightly, his shoulder inadvertently brushing against Stephanie's arm. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when passengers gave their statements, accounts would vary on the precise sequence of events. But Judge Washington's video would capture it all. Stephanie's reaction was explosive and disproportionate. She spun around, her face contorted with anger. "Don't you dare push me," she shouted, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Before Letitia could intervene, before Jamal could stammer an apology, Stephanie shoved the 12-year-old boy backward with both hands. The force of her push, combined with the narrow confines of the aisle and the still-present beverage cart, sent Jamal crashing into the metal edge of the cart. There was a sickening crack as his jaw connected with the metal frame. Blood immediately spilled from Jamal's mouth as he collapsed to the floor of the aircraft. One of his teeth skittered across the aisle carpet. "Jamal!" Letitia screamed, lunging toward her son as Zora began wailing in terror. The cabin erupted in chaos. Several passengers jumped to their feet. Someone shouted for a doctor. A woman in row 25 screamed. The captain's voice came over the intercom, demanding to know what was happening. Through it all, Stephanie stood frozen, seemingly shocked by her own actions. Then, as Letitia cradled her bleeding son, the flight attendant's expression changed from shock to calculation. "He attacked me," she declared loudly, backing away. Everyone saw it. This child attacked a flight attendant. Marcus stared at her in horror. "Stephanie, that's not what happened. I saw the whole thing. He pushed me first," she insisted, her voice rising hysterically. "I was defending myself." Judge Washington continued recording, making sure to capture not just the aftermath but Stephanie's attempts to rewrite the narrative in real time. In his 3 decades on the bench, he had seen many people try to craft false narratives after committing harmful acts. The pattern was familiar: claim victimhood, establish an alternative story quickly and loudly, create doubt before evidence could be gathered. Letitia barely heard any of this. Her focus was entirely on Jamal, whose face was rapidly swelling, blood continuing to pour from his mouth. "Baby, look at me," she pleaded, her nurse training kicking in despite her terror. "Can you move your jaw?" Jamal tried and immediately cried out in pain, the sound muffled and wet with blood. "It's broken," Letitia realized aloud, her voice breaking. "His jaw is broken." Zora stood frozen, her bathroom emergency forgotten in the trauma of seeing her brother injured and bleeding. Silent tears streamed down her face as she clutched her Princess Tiana doll so tightly that later, Letitia would find that one of the doll's arms had been twisted backward. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time with grim authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a medical emergency, we are diverting to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing. We'll be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. As the announcement ended, Stephanie was already on the cabin phone, presumably speaking to the captain. Her gestures were animated, her expression righteously indignant. She was establishing her version of events with the flight crew. Judge Washington made 3 quick, discreet phone calls, one to a former clerk who now worked for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, one to a trusted colleague on the federal bench in Atlanta, and one to his own chief of staff. Each call was brief, just long enough to set certain wheels in motion. Meanwhile, Letitia held pressure against Jamal's bleeding mouth with the few cocktail napkins they had, which quickly became saturated with blood. No one, not even Marcus, had brought additional napkins or first aid supplies. "I want to go home," Jamal mumbled through his rapidly swelling jaw, the words nearly unintelligible. "I want to go home." "I know, baby," Letitia whispered, her own tears falling freely now. "I know." Their dream vacation, 3 years in the saving, lay in ruins around them, much like Jamal's broken tooth on the airplane carpet that no one had bothered to pick up. The aircraft touched down at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport with a jolt that sent fresh pain shooting through Jamal's broken jaw. Letitia continued holding her blood-soaked napkin against her son's face, whispering reassurances even as her own hands trembled. "We've landed, baby. Help is coming." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom one final time, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Law enforcement and medical personnel will be boarding the aircraft momentarily." Passengers murmured anxiously, many still standing despite the announcement, straining to see the injured boy. Cell phones recorded the scene from multiple angles, though none captured the full incident as clearly as Judge Washington's video. Stephanie had retreated to the front of the aircraft, where she stood conferring intensely with the other flight attendants. Her face was composed now, her uniform straightened, any trace of the rage that had driven her to assault a child carefully concealed beneath a mask of professional concern. Marcus alone looked troubled, his gaze repeatedly returning to Jamal and Letitia. Within minutes, the aircraft door opened, and 3 airport police officers boarded, followed by paramedics with a stretcher. But instead of heading directly toward the visibly injured child, the officers approached Stephanie first. She spoke rapidly, gesturing toward row 23 with an expression of aggrieved authority. The lead officer, a square-jawed man with a buzz cut, nodded and then proceeded down the aisle, not toward Jamal, but toward him, his hand resting casually near his holster. "I understand there was an assault on a crew member," he stated, looking at Jamal with suspicion despite the boy's obvious injuries. "We need everyone involved to remain calm and follow instructions." Letitia's eyes widened in disbelief. "My son is the victim here. He needs medical attention immediately." "Ma'am, we need to secure the situation first," the officer replied firmly. "The flight attendant has reported being physically assaulted by your son, which is a federal offense. We need to take statements before." "Are you serious right now?" Letitia interrupted, her voice rising with incredulous anger. "Look at my child. A grown woman broke his jaw. She assaulted him, not the other way around." The second officer, a younger man, moved his hand to his taser. "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice and comply with our instructions." Judge Washington chose this moment to stand. At 6'2", with silver hair and the commanding presence developed over 3 decades on the federal bench, he naturally drew attention. "Officers," he said, his deep voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I am Federal Judge Terrence Washington, Northern District. I witnessed and recorded the entire incident. The flight attendant physically assaulted this child without provocation. Your first priority should be getting him medical attention, not securing a crime scene where the victim is being treated as a suspect." The officers hesitated, clearly unprepared for the intervention of a federal judge. The paramedics seized the moment of uncertainty to push forward. "We need to assess the patient now," the lead paramedic insisted, already kneeling beside Jamal. As the paramedics began examining Jamal, a flurry of conflicting passenger statements erupted throughout the cabin. "I saw the whole thing. That flight attendant pushed him for no reason," called a woman from row 22. "The boy was causing trouble the whole flight," countered an older man from row 20. "The attendant was just doing her job. She's been treating them differently from the moment they boarded," insisted a college-aged girl from row 24. "The boy bumped into her first," claimed another passenger. The third officer, recognizing the deteriorating situation, made a decision. "We're going to need statements from everyone. If you witnessed the incident, please remain on board until an investigator can speak with you. Those not involved may deplane once we've secured statements from the primary parties." An airline customer service representative boarded, looking harried and already in damage control mode. He headed straight for Stephanie, who was now dabbing at non-existent tears with a tissue. The paramedics had finished their initial assessment of Jamal. "He needs immediate transport to the hospital," the lead paramedic announced. "Definite mandibular fracture, possible concussion, significant soft tissue damage, and dental trauma." "I'm coming with him," Letitia stated in a tone that brooked no argument, gathering Zora with her free arm. "Ma'am," the first officer began, "we need your statement before." Judge Washington interrupted again. "Officer, I have your badge number, and I've already contacted the Department of Justice. This child needs medical care, and his mother, a registered nurse, should accompany him. You can take statements at the hospital if necessary." The mention of the Department of Justice caused a visible shift in the officer's demeanor. The lead officer nodded stiffly. "Fine. But we'll need contact information and statements later." As the paramedics prepared to move Jamal onto the stretcher, the customer service representative approached Letitia with a carefully practiced expression of corporate concern. Ms. Thompson, on behalf of Atlantic Skyways, I want to express our deepest regret about this unfortunate incident. If you could provide your contact information, we'd like to discuss compensation for your inconvenience and perhaps an alternative flight to your destination once your son is treated. Inconvenience? Letitia repeated incredulously. Your employee assaulted my child, broke his jaw, and you're calling it an inconvenience? The representative maintained his plastic smile. I understand you're upset. We'll conduct a full investigation, of course. In the meantime, the airline would like to offer accommodations in Atlanta and... Save it, Letitia cut him off. You'll be hearing from our attorney. As the paramedics began moving the stretcher with Jamal toward the exit, Stephanie called out from the front of the plane. He was disruptive the entire flight. He ignored my instructions and then pushed me when I tried to maintain order. Ask anyone. Several passengers began shouting at once, some supporting Stephanie's version, others vehemently contradicting it. Zora, overwhelmed by the chaos and her brother's injury, began sobbing uncontrollably. I just needed to go to the bathroom, she wailed. This is all my fault. It's not your fault, sweetie, Letitia assured her, though her own voice trembled with a mixture of rage and fear. None of this is your fault. As they reached the aircraft door, Judge Washington approached them. Ms. Thompson, he said quietly, showing her his business card. I have video evidence of everything that happened. I'll be in touch once your son is stabilized. Letitia took the card with trembling fingers, too overwhelmed to fully process the significance of this offer of support. Thank you, she managed. The customer service representative, overhearing this exchange, looked suddenly concerned. He pulled out his phone and stepped away, presumably to alert higher management. What would unfold from this point would be far more than anyone on that flight could have anticipated. A single act of racist aggression, captured on video by a federal judge, was about to spark a chain reaction that would expose not just one flight attendant's bigotry, but an entire system that had enabled and concealed such behavior for years. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but felt powerless to intervene? Or maybe you've been in a situation where someone unexpectedly stood up for you when you needed it most. The Thompson family's nightmare was just beginning, but Judge Washington's decision to document everything would prove crucial in what was to come. Comment number 1 if you think the officers should have immediately helped Jamal instead of questioning him, or number 2 if you think they were just following protocol. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how this shocking story continues. Would you have had the courage to speak up like Judge Washington did if you witnessed this injustice? The fluorescent lights of Grady Memorial Hospital's emergency department cast harsh shadows across Jamal's swollen face. He lay semi-conscious on a gurney, and delivering pain medication into his arm as medical personnel moved efficiently around him, preparing for emergency surgery. Letitia stood at his side, still in her travel clothes, her shirt stained with her son's blood. As a nurse, she understood every term the doctors used as they discussed Jamal's injuries: comminuted mandibular fracture, dental avulsion, soft tissue lacerations. As a mother, each clinical phrase pierced her heart like a knife. We need to place hardware to stabilize the jaw, the oral surgeon explained. The impact fractured it in 3 places. He'll require dental implants later for the lost teeth, but our priority now is stabilizing the bone and preventing infection. Letitia nodded mechanically. How long will the surgery take? 2 to 3 hours. He's young and otherwise healthy, which works in his favor. Zora sat in a nearby chair, her Princess Tiana doll clutched to her chest, eyes wide and frightened. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the plane, shock rendering her uncharacteristically silent. Is there someone who can stay with your daughter during the procedure? The surgeon asked gently. Letitia shook her head. They were 1,000 miles from home, with no friends or family nearby. Their luggage remained on the diverted flight, which had continued to Orlando after the delay. They had nothing but the clothes they wore and the contents of Letitia's purse. I can help with that. Letitia turned to find Judge Washington standing in the doorway of the treatment room. He'd followed them to the hospital after giving his initial statement to the airport police. "I've contacted a victim's advocate from the court to sit with your daughter during your son's surgery," he explained. "She's on her way. And I've taken the liberty of booking you a hotel room nearby for tonight. The hospital can arrange transportation." "Why are you doing this?" Letitia asked, too exhausted for pretense. "Because what happened to your son was wrong," he replied simply. "And because I'm in a position to help make it right." Before Letitia could respond, a new figure appeared in the doorway, a woman in a sleek pantsuit, her expression a careful blend of concern and calculation. "Ms. Thompson. I'm Veronica Daniels, Senior Customer Relations Manager for Atlantic Skyways. May I speak with you privately for a moment?" Judge Washington's expression hardened. "Ms. Thompson's son is about to undergo emergency surgery for injuries inflicted by your employee. This isn't the time." Veronica's practiced smile didn't waver. "I understand completely. I just wanted to personally express the airline's deepest regrets about this unfortunate incident and provide Ms. Thompson with some immediate assistance." She extended an envelope toward Letitia. "The airline would like to offer $5,000 in immediate compensation for your medical expenses and the disruption to your vacation plans. We've also arranged first-class tickets to Orlando for when you're ready to continue your journey." Letitia stared at the envelope without taking it. "We would, of course, require a standard release form," Veronica continued smoothly, producing a document from her briefcase. "Just confirming that you accept this compensation as resolution for today's regrettable events." Judge Washington stepped forward. "That document is a non-disclosure agreement combined with a liability waiver. By signing it, Ms. Thompson would forfeit her right to seek appropriate damages for her son's injuries and would be legally barred from discussing the assault publicly." Veronica's smile tightened. "Judge Washington, with all due respect, this is a private matter between our airline and our customer." "Your employee committed felony assault against a minor," he replied evenly. "That makes it considerably more than a customer service issue." A nurse appeared at the door. "We need to take Jamal to pre-op now." Letitia leaned down to kiss her son's forehead gently, avoiding his injured jaw. "Mommy loves you. I'll be right here when you wake up." Jamal's eyes fluttered, clouded with pain medication. "Are we still going to Disney?" he mumbled through swollen lips. The question broke something in Letitia. Tears she'd been holding back since the incident finally spilled down her cheeks. "We'll see, baby. Don't worry about that now." As the nurses wheeled Jamal away, Letitia turned back to Veronica. "My son has a broken jaw in 3 places. He's lost 2 teeth. He'll need months of recovery and probably years of dental work. And you're offering $5,000 if I promise never to tell anyone what your employee did to him?" She took a step closer to the airline representative. "My son did nothing wrong. Nothing. He was trying to help his little sister use the bathroom after your flight attendant refused to let us pass. And for that, she assaulted him, broke his jaw, and then immediately lied about what happened. Ms. Thompson, I understand you're upset. No, you don't understand at all. But you will. Now please leave. My son is in surgery, and I need to focus on him right now." Veronica hesitated, then placed her business card on a nearby table. "Please call me when you're ready to discuss resolution. Our offer won't remain open indefinitely." After she left, Judge Washington placed a gentle hand on Letitia's shoulder. "You made the right decision. That offer wasn't justice, it was damage control." "I can't afford a lawyer," Letitia admitted quietly. "I'm a single mother. I saved for 3 years for this vacation. I don't have money for legal battles with an airline." "You don't need to worry about that," Judge Washington replied. "I've contacted an attorney who specializes in civil rights cases. He's agreed to take your case pro bono." "Why would he do that?" "Because I showed him the video." Before Letitia could ask more questions, her phone rang. It was her supervisor from the hospital where she worked. Letitia, I just saw the news. There's a video going viral of a flight attendant attacking a black child. They're saying it's your son. Is that true? Letitia's stomach dropped. Yes, Janet. We were on our way to Disney World. The flight was diverted to Atlanta. Jamal's in surgery now. I'm so sorry, Janet said, her voice softening momentarily before shifting to a more professional tone. Look, I hate to add to your stress, but I need to know when you'll be back. We're short-staffed as it is, and I can only hold your shifts for so long. My son's jaw is broken in 3 places, Letitia repeated numbly. I have no idea when we'll be back. I understand it's a difficult situation, but you've already used most of your PTO for this vacation. Hospital policy only allows 3 days of emergency family leave without documentation. I'll get you documentation, Letitia promised, fighting to keep her voice steady. Good. And Letitia? The hospital board is concerned about the publicity. We've already received calls from reporters asking for comments about you and your son. As you know, our social media policy prohibits employees from making statements that might reflect negatively on the hospital. The implication was clear: don't make waves, or your job could be at risk. After ending the call, Letitia sat heavily in a chair beside Zora, who had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by trauma and tears. They're threatening my job, she whispered to Judge Washington. Indirectly, but clearly. He nodded grimly. Unfortunately, that's often how these situations unfold. The moment victims speak up, systems mobilize to silence them. A victim's advocate arrived, a kind-faced woman named Darlene who agreed to watch Zora while Letitia dealt with the mounting crisis. Judge Washington led Letitia to a quiet corner of the waiting room. There's something else you should know. The video of the incident is spreading online, but some early news reports are framing it problematically. They're using your son's school photo alongside Stephanie Donovan's professional headshot, and some outlets are repeating her claim that Jamal was disruptive and initiated physical contact. He showed her a news alert on his phone from a major network: incident on Atlantic Skyways flight, attendant injured in altercation with juvenile passenger. How can they report it like that? Letitia demanded. She broke my son's jaw. Because Stephanie gave a statement immediately, and Atlantic Skyways has a public relations department working overtime. But there's hope. Social media videos from passengers are challenging the official narrative, and I've contacted someone who can help shift the momentum. As if on cue, a tall black man in a perfectly tailored suit strode into the waiting room, radiating confidence and purpose. Judge Washington, he greeted, shaking the older man's hand before turning to Letitia. Ms. Thompson, I'm attorney Darius Foster. I understand your son has been the victim of a serious assault. I want you to know that I'm here to ensure he receives justice. Letitia looked between the two men, overwhelmed. I appreciate the offer, but as I told Judge Washington, I can't afford. My services are pro bono, Foster interrupted smoothly. Judge Washington and I go back many years. He was my mentor when I clerked for him after law school. More importantly, I've seen the video, and what happened to your son is not just an assault, it's a civil rights violation. He gestured to the empty chair beside Letitia. May I? When she nodded, he sat and continued, his voice both professional and compassionate. Here's what you need to know. Atlantic Skyways is already building a defense for their employee. They'll claim Jamal was disruptive, that Stephanie acted in self-defense, or that the contact was accidental. They'll dig into your past and Jamal's, looking for anything they can use to discredit you. There's nothing to find, Letitia said firmly. My son is an honor student. I'm a registered nurse with no criminal record. That's good, but it doesn't matter as much as you might think. They'll twist innocent facts into damaging narratives. Did you know that hospital staff has already been treating Jamal differently? Letitia frowned. What do you mean? I observed it on my way in. White children with less severe injuries are being treated in private rooms. Jamal was in a curtained bay in the main emergency area. The nurse assigned to him has checked on him half as frequently as patients in those private rooms. These are the subtle ways bias manifests in systems, ways that are often invisible unless you're looking for them. Letitia nodded slowly, unsurprised. She'd seen similar patterns in her own hospital. What I need from you right now, Foster continued, is permission to act as your legal representative. That means I can speak to the media on your behalf, interface with the airline, and begin building our case. What case, exactly? Civil assault and battery against Stephanie Donovan personally. Civil rights violations against Atlantic Skyways for creating and tolerating a discriminatory environment. And a separate action against the airport police for their handling of the situation. Judge Washington added, Attorney Foster is being modest. He's won 3 major civil rights cases against corporations larger than Atlantic Skyways. He knows exactly how to navigate these waters. Before Letitia could respond, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Jamal's school principal. Dear Ms. Thompson, it began. We've become aware of an incident involving Jamal that has received media attention. While we support our students, we're concerned about potential disruption when classes resume. We'd like to discuss alternative learning arrangements until this situation resolves. Letitia stared at the screen in disbelief. They want to keep him out of school because he was assaulted? Because it might disrupt things? Foster wasn't surprised. It's another system protecting itself rather than the victim. May I? He held out his hand for the phone, and when Letitia handed it over, he read the email thoroughly. This is actually helpful for our case, he said after a moment. It demonstrates the cascading harm from the initial assault. Educational disruption, emotional distress, social isolation. He returned the phone and leaned forward, his expression intensely serious. Ms. Thompson, what happened to your son was not an isolated incident. It was the product of systemic biases that allowed Stephanie Donovan to feel empowered to act that way. And now those same systems are activating to protect themselves and her, rather than delivering justice to your son. Letitia looked toward the surgical wing where her son lay unconscious, his face broken, his vacation ruined, his school already pushing him away. What do we do now? She asked quietly. Now, Foster said with calm determination, we fight back. But this won't be quick or easy. The airline has already offered a settlement because they know they're vulnerable. But they'll escalate before they capitulate. Are you prepared for that? Letitia thought of Jamal's excitement about their trip, his resilience in the face of previous injustices, his confusion and pain on that airplane. She thought of Zora, traumatized by witnessing violence against her brother. Yes, she said firmly. I'm prepared. Foster nodded, satisfied with her resolve. Then let's get started. As they began discussing strategy, none of them noticed a man in a business suit watching them from across the waiting room, speaking quietly into his phone, an Atlantic Skyways executive, already reporting back to the airline's crisis management team about the new development. Federal Judge Terrence Washington had brought in attorney Darius Foster, and the Thompson family wasn't going to be silenced with a quick payoff and a non-disclosure agreement. The battle lines were being drawn, and what had begun as a simple family vacation was evolving into something much larger. A fight for justice that would expose not just one flight attendant's actions, but an entire industry's pattern of discrimination. 5 days after the incident, attorney Darius Foster stood on the steps of the federal courthouse in Atlanta, microphones clustered before him like metal flowers. Behind him stood Letitia Thompson, her face a careful mask of dignity despite her exhaustion. Jamal remained in the hospital, his jaw wired shut, unable to speak or eat solid food. Today, we have filed charges against Stephanie Donovan for felony assault of a minor, Foster announced to the assembled press. Additionally, we have initiated a civil rights lawsuit against Atlantic Skyways for fostering a discriminatory environment that emboldened Ms. Donovan to commit this unconscionable act of violence against a 12-year-old child. Questions erupted from the journalists. Is it true the boy pushed the flight attendant first? How much are you seeking in damages? What evidence do you have of discrimination? Foster raised a hand for quiet. We have irrefutable video evidence showing Ms. Donovan physically assaulting Jamal Thompson without provocation. This video, captured by federal judge Terrence Washington, who witnessed the entire incident, contradicts the false narrative initially put forward by Atlantic Skyways. He gestured to Letitia. Ms. Thompson would like to make a brief statement. Letitia stepped forward, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. My son was excited to fly for the first time. He was going to Disney World, a trip we had saved for over 3 years. Instead, he's in a hospital bed with a shattered jaw, unable to speak, eat, or attend school. All because a flight attendant decided that a black child asking for help was a threat that justified violence. She paused, composing herself. Jamal has always been taught to be respectful, to follow rules, and to stand up for what's right. He did nothing wrong on that flight. Nothing. I'm pursuing this case not just for my son, but for every child who has been treated unjustly because of the color of their skin. As they fielded more questions, a sleek town car pulled up to the curb. A team of impeccably dressed individuals emerged, Atlantic Skyways legal representation, led by Harold Winters, a senior partner at one of the country's most prestigious corporate defense firms. Mr. Foster, Winters called, approaching the press conference with cameras swiveling to capture this unexpected confrontation. Atlantic Skyways remains deeply concerned about the unfortunate incident involving the Thompson family. We would welcome the opportunity to discuss an appropriate resolution without the need for protracted litigation. Foster smiled thinly. Any discussions regarding resolution will occur through proper channels, Mr. Winters, not as performative gestures for the press. My client has already rejected your initial offer because it failed to acknowledge the gravity of what occurred. We're prepared to increase our offer substantially, Winters pressed. And to implement additional crew training to prevent similar incidents. This isn't about money, Letitia interjected, unable to contain herself. This is about justice for my son and accountability for a system that allowed him to be assaulted. The confrontation made for dramatic footage that dominated news cycles throughout the day. Public opinion, initially divided based on incomplete information, began shifting as Judge Washington's video was partially released on major networks, showing clearly that Jamal had not initiated any aggression. Behind the scenes, the legal machinery ground into motion with ruthless efficiency. Atlantic Skyways investigators began compiling a dossier on the Thompson family. They discovered that Letitia had once filed for bankruptcy after her ex-husband abandoned the family, leaving her with medical bills from Zora's premature birth. They noted that Jamal had been sent to the principal's office twice in 5th grade for talking back to a teacher who had made racially insensitive comments. They documented social media posts where Letitia had expressed support for Black Lives Matter. None of these facts were remotely relevant to what had occurred on Flight 1382, but the airline's legal team prepared to use them to paint a picture of a financially motivated plaintiff with an anti-authority son and political biases. Meanwhile, Foster's team made discoveries of their own. Through careful investigation and confidential sources within Atlantic Skyways, they uncovered a disturbing pattern. Stephanie Donovan had been the subject of 27 passenger complaints over the past 5 years, many specifically alleging discriminatory treatment toward passengers of color. Each complaint had been dismissed or buried by airline management. More damning still, they discovered an internal email from a regional manager addressing one such complaint: Stephanie is experienced and reliable. These accusations of bias are impossible to prove and not worth the hassle of formal investigation. Handle it with the usual customer service voucher and move on. Foster also obtained Stephanie's personnel file from a previous employer, a smaller regional airline where she had worked before joining Atlantic Skyways. She had been terminated following an incident involving a Lading's family but had somehow kept this information off her application to Atlantic Skyways. While the legal teams gathered ammunition, Judge Washington found himself facing unexpected consequences for his intervention. A complaint had been filed with the Judicial Conduct Committee, alleging that he had abandoned judicial neutrality by actively involving himself in a civil case. The complainant remained anonymous, but the timing suggested connections to Atlantic Skyways. "They're trying to intimidate you into backing down," Foster told Washington during a private meeting in his office. "Without your video and testimony, their defense becomes much stronger." The judge nodded grimly. "I anticipated as much. It won't work. I've faced worse pressure in 32 years on the bench." "There's something else," Foster added, sliding a file across the desk. "Our investigation into Stephanie Donovan turned up something unexpected. Her father is Lawrence Donovan." Washington's eyebrows rose. "The Lawrence Donovan? The hotel magnate?" "The same. And he owns 8% of Atlantic Skyways stock, making him one of their largest individual investors. He also sits on the board of directors for the parent company that owns the airline." "That explains the aggressive defense and attempt to buy silence quickly," Washington mused. "They're not just protecting the airline's reputation, they're protecting a board member's daughter." As the case proceeded toward discovery, the Thompson family faced mounting personal challenges. Jamal's recovery proved more difficult than initially expected. Infection set in around one of the surgical sites, requiring additional hospitalization and intravenous antibiotics. Unable to eat solid food, he lost 15 pounds from his already slender frame. The psychological impact was equally severe. Once outgoing and confident, Jamal became withdrawn and anxious. He communicated through a whiteboard, but often went days barely writing anything. Nightmares disrupted his sleep, leaving him exhausted and depressed. Zora, traumatized by witnessing the assault on her brother, developed separation anxiety. She refused to leave Letitia's side, even to go to the bathroom, triggering painful memories of the incident that had started it all. Letitia, meanwhile, received notification that she had been placed on unpaid leave pending review of her compliance with hospital absence policies. The message was clear: pursuing the case against Atlantic Skyways might cost her the career she had built over 15 years. Their home in Charlotte became a target as well. Anonymous threats arrived by mail. Someone spray-painted racial slurs on their garage door. A brick shattered their living room window in the middle of the night. When Foster learned of these incidents, he immediately arranged for the family to move to a secure apartment building with 24-hour security, paid for by his firm. "This is how they operate," he explained to Letitia. "They can't attack your case directly because the evidence is too strong, so they're trying to pressure you into giving up." "I won't give up," Letitia assured him, though her eyes reflected the toll these weeks had taken. "But I'm worried about my children." Foster nodded sympathetically. "I understand. Which is why I have some good news. The FBI Civil Rights Division has agreed to open an investigation into the incident as a potential hate crime." "The FBI? Isn't that unusual for what the airline is calling a customer service incident?" "Entirely unusual, which is why it's significant. They've reviewed Judge Washington's complete video and determined there's sufficient evidence to investigate whether Jamal's civil rights were violated through an act of racially motivated violence." This development changed the dynamics dramatically. Atlantic Skyways found itself facing not just civil litigation but potential federal criminal implications. Their stock price dropped 12% in a single day when the FBI investigation made headlines. Stephanie Donovan, who had been placed on administrative leave with pay immediately following the incident, suddenly found her position more precarious. The airline, initially steadfast in her defense, began creating distance between themselves and her actions. Then came a breakthrough that would transform the case entirely. A former Atlantic Skyways flight attendant named Melissa Chen contacted Foster's office. She had worked with Stephanie for 3 years before resigning in protest over the toxic culture she had witnessed. Stephanie bragged about how she could treat certain passengers however she wanted because her father would protect her, Chen revealed during her deposition. She specifically targeted families of color, especially those who appeared to be flying for the first time or seemed unfamiliar with airline procedures. Chen provided text messages between crew members discussing Stephanie's behavior and management's willful blindness toward it. In one exchange, a supervisor wrote, "Just keep Stephanie away from the diversity training. Last time she asked questions that nearly got us all fired." Most damning of all, Chen revealed that Atlantic Skyways had an internal classification system for passengers, visible only to crew members on their tablets. Passengers were categorized by frequent flyer status, but also by what the airline called service optimization factors, a euphemism for demographic information including race, apparent income level, and English proficiency. "We were trained to provide appropriately tailored service, based on these factors," Chen explained. In practice, that meant first-class treatment for certain passengers and bare minimum service for others, particularly people of color traveling in economy. This revelation transformed what had appeared to be an individual act of racism into evidence of systemic discrimination, exactly what Foster had suspected from the beginning. As these discoveries leaked to the media, public outrage intensified. A grassroots boycott of Atlantic Skyways gained momentum, with prominent celebrities and business leaders publicly canceling their corporate accounts with the airline. The airline's initial strategy of attacking Jamal's character backfired spectacularly when his school released a statement supporting him. "Jamal Thompson has consistently demonstrated exceptional character, academic excellence, and leadership among his peers. Any suggestion that his behavior contributed to this unfortunate incident contradicts everything we know about this outstanding young man." Protest groups gathered at Atlantic Skyways terminals across the country, carrying signs with Jamal's school photo and the phrase, "His only crime was flying while black." Inside the corporate headquarters, panic set in as the financial impact mounted. An emergency board meeting was called, where Lawrence Donovan argued vehemently against settlement, insisting that his daughter was being scapegoated. "This is nothing but extortion," he declared, pounding the conference table. "If we settle, we're admitting guilt for a system-wide problem that doesn't exist." The CEO, watching the company's stock price plummet and facing pressure from other board members, disagreed. "We have a video of our employee breaking a child's jaw. We have evidence of prior complaints being ignored. We have internal documents suggesting racial profiling of passengers. This isn't about your daughter anymore, Lawrence. This is about the survival of the airline." As the legal pressure intensified and public opinion solidified against them, Atlantic Skyways made a desperate final attempt to control the narrative. They offered Letitia $15 million, 3 times their previous offer. Along with guaranteed medical care for Jamal, a public apology, and a promise to implement comprehensive anti-bias training. Foster brought the offer to Letitia, who sat silently as he outlined the terms. "It's a significant improvement over their previous offers," he acknowledged. "And it would provide financial security for your family's future. But as always, the decision is yours." Letitia looked at Jamal, who was sitting by the window of their secure apartment, staring out at a city that wasn't home, his jaw still wired shut, his body thin and fragile from weeks of liquid nutrition. "What happens if we don't accept?" she asked. "Then we proceed to trial. Based on the evidence we've gathered, I believe we would win a larger judgment. But trials are unpredictable, and the process would be grueling for your family, especially Jamal." Letitia crossed the room and knelt beside her son, showing him the settlement offer on a tablet. He read it carefully, then picked up his whiteboard and wrote a single question. "Will she go to jail?" Foster approached and answered honestly. "The settlement only resolves the civil case, Jamal. The criminal charges and FBI investigation would continue regardless of whether you accept this offer." Jamal wrote again, "Will they admit what they did was wrong? The settlement includes a public apology, but it's carefully worded to limit their legal exposure. It acknowledges that you were injured during an interaction with their employee but doesn't explicitly admit fault." The boy's face hardened with determination as he wrote a final message. "Then no deal." Letitia looked at her son with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you sure, baby? This money would pay for college for both you and Zora. We wouldn't have to worry about medical bills." Jamal shook his head firmly and wrote, "It's not about money. It's about the truth. Foster nodded with respect. Then we continue to trial. And based on what I've seen of this young man's courage, I believe the truth will prevail. As Foster left their apartment that evening, his phone rang. It was his investigator. "You're not going to believe what I just found," the investigator said without preamble. Stephanie Donovan wasn't fired from her previous airline for a single incident. There's a pattern going back 15 years across 3 different airlines. And guess what? Daddy's money made the records disappear each time she got into trouble. Can you prove it? Better than that. I found one of her victims from 10 years ago, an Indian family she assaulted during a flight to Los Angeles. They were silenced with a settlement and NDA, but after seeing Jamal's story on the news, they're willing to break the agreement and testify. Foster smiled grimly as he ended the call. The final pieces were falling into place for a trial that would do more than deliver justice for one family. It would expose decades of corporate complicity and discrimination that had affected countless passengers. The stage was set for a courtroom showdown that would capture national attention and potentially transform airline industry practices forever. The surveillance video leaked on a Tuesday morning. Despite court orders sealing evidence until trial, someone, likely an employee at the Atlanta airport, uploaded the complete, unedited footage from the aircraft's security cameras to a social media platform. Within hours, it had been viewed 20 million times. The video left no room for interpretation. It showed, in clinical detail, every microaggression Jamal and his family had endured throughout the flight. It captured Stephanie Donovan's deliberate neglect of their needs while attentively serving white passengers. Most devastating of all, it showed the moment of assault with undeniable clarity, Jamal stumbling slightly from turbulence, Stephanie's disproportionate rage, and the sickening impact as she shoved him into the metal beverage cart. The sound of his jaw breaking was audible even through the plane's ambient noise. America watched. And America reacted. Protesters gathered outside Atlantic Skyway's headquarters in Dallas, their numbers growing from hundreds to thousands within days. Celebrities and athletes posted messages of support for Jamal using the viral hashtag #JusticeForJamal. Civil rights organizations called for a nationwide boycott of the airline. Corporate accounts began dropping Atlantic Skyways en masse, with major companies issuing statements about their commitment to supporting businesses that aligned with their values of diversity and inclusion. The airline's stock plummeted 28% in a single week. For Stephanie Donovan, the video's release transformed her from a controversial figure to a national pariah. Recognized in a grocery store, she was confronted by angry shoppers who followed her to her car, recording her on their phones while chanting, "Child abuser." Her home address was doxed online, forcing her to temporarily relocate. Her father, Lawrence Donovan, found his hotel empire facing collateral damage as protesters targeted his properties with boycotts and negative reviews. Business associates distanced themselves, canceling long-standing partnerships and joint ventures. Atlantic Skyways, desperate to contain the growing crisis, announced Stephanie's termination and issued a carefully worded apology that acknowledged unacceptable behavior, without explicitly admitting liability. They unveiled a new Respect in the Skies initiative, promising comprehensive retraining for all staff and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. The public wasn't impressed. "Too little, too late," commented civil rights leader Reverend Marcus Johnson during a television interview. "This isn't about one bad apple flight attendant. This is about a corporate culture that enabled and concealed racist behavior until they were caught on camera." Meanwhile, Jamal Thompson faced a grueling recovery process far from the public eye. 6 weeks after the assault, his jaw remained wired shut. Unable to speak or eat solid food, he received nutrition through protein shakes and pureed foods consumed through a straw. The physical pain, while substantial, paled in comparison to the psychological trauma. Nightmares plagued his sleep, vivid dreams where he was trapped on an endless flight, unable to escape as threats closed in around him. He developed anxiety around white authority figures, flinching when doctors or police officers came near him. Once outgoing and eager to share his knowledge about everything from astronomy to sports, Jamal now communicated primarily through brief written notes, withdrawn into a protective shell of silence. The therapist Foster had arranged diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. He blames himself, Letitia confided to Foster during a private meeting. He keeps writing notes asking if Zora still would have had her accident if he hadn't tried to help her. If we would still have gone to Disney if he had just stayed in his seat. Foster shook his head sadly. Self-blame is common among trauma victims, especially children. They try to make sense of senseless acts by assuming responsibility. It gives them the illusion of control. How do I help him understand it wasn't his fault? Therapy is crucial, but so is seeing justice done. Children have an innate sense of fairness. Seeing Stephanie Donovan held accountable may help Jamal process what happened to him. Letitia's own struggles mounted as well. Her hospital officially terminated her employment, citing excessive unexcused absences, despite Foster's efforts to invoke family medical leave protections. The loss of income, combined with mounting medical bills not covered by their insurance, created financial pressure that added to her stress. The media attention brought unwelcome intrusions into their lives. Reporters camped outside their secured apartment building. Tabloids published speculative articles about Letitia's past, including her divorce and bankruptcy. Conservative commentators questioned her motives, suggesting she had coached Jamal to provoke the incident for financial gain. Most painful of all was the impact on 8-year-old Zora. Once bubbly and outgoing, she now suffered from severe separation anxiety, refusing to leave her mother's side even momentarily. She developed a fear of public restrooms, associated with the traumatic catalyst of the incident. Night terrors disrupted her sleep, leaving her exhausted and irritable during the day. Her school performance, previously excellent, plummeted. Teachers reported that she couldn't focus in class and burst into tears when asked about her brother or their aborted Disney trip. The child psychologist diagnosed her with secondary trauma. Psychological injury sustained not from direct harm but from witnessing harm to a loved one. Both of my children are suffering, Letitia told Judge Washington during his visit to their apartment. And for what? Because we dared to fly while black? Because Jamal asked for a drink? Because Zora needed to use the bathroom? For nothing, the judge replied solemnly. There is no justification, no explanation that makes any sense of what happened to your family. But there can be accountability, and through that, perhaps some healing. The Thompson family's ordeal had triggered something larger than themselves. As news of the case spread, other victims of Stephanie Donovan began coming forward, breaking non-disclosure agreements to share similar experiences of discrimination and mistreatment. Melissa Rodriguez described how Stephanie had berated her family for speaking Spanish during a flight in 2019, threatening to have them removed from the aircraft for making other passengers uncomfortable. Dr. Amir Patel revealed that Stephanie had deliberately spilled hot coffee on his elderly mother during a flight in 2017, then claimed it was turbulence despite the smooth flying conditions. When he complained to the airline, he was offered vouchers and a non-disclosure agreement. James Washington, no relation to the judge, shared how Stephanie had accused his 14-year-old son of stealing another passenger's headphones in 2020, subjecting him to a humiliating public search despite the actual owner later finding them in an overhead bin. His family received a settlement and signed an NDA. Each story followed the same pattern: discriminatory treatment, clear racial targeting, complaints to the airline, and then settlements contingent on silence. A pattern that had allowed Stephanie to continue her behavior unchecked for years, protected by her father's influence and the company's desire to avoid negative publicity. Foster's investigation revealed another disturbing aspect of Atlantic Skyways operations, an internal program called passenger profile optimization. Supposedly designed to enhance customer experience, the system flagged passengers based on factors including race, apparent socioeconomic status, and English proficiency, guiding crew members on how to appropriately allocate attention and resources. In practice, this created a two-tier service model: preferential treatment for white, affluent-appearing passengers and minimal service for everyone else, particularly passengers of color traveling in economy class. The discovery of this program transformed the Thompson case from an individual incident of assault to evidence of systemic discrimination institutionalized within corporate policy. It also attracted the attention of federal regulators, who launched an investigation into whether Atlantic Skyways had violated civil rights laws in its treatment of passengers. As public pressure mounted and legal challenges multiplied, the airline's crisis deepened. Unable to stem the financial bleeding from boycotts and canceled corporate accounts, Atlantic Skyways announced layoffs of 2,000 employees. Their CEO resigned, citing personal reasons, though industry insiders confirmed he had been forced out by the board. Lawrence Donovan fought desperately to protect his daughter and his investment, using his considerable influence to pressure media outlets into balanced coverage and politicians into public statements supporting the airline. He hired a top crisis management firm to rehabilitate Stephanie's image, positioning her as an overwhelmed working mother who made a split-second error in judgment. The strategy backfired spectacularly when journalists discovered Stephanie had previously been fired from 2 other airlines for similar incidents, only to have the records expunged through her father's legal team and financial pressure. 7 weeks after the assault, as the case moved inexorably toward trial, Foster received an unexpected call from his investigator. "You need to see this immediately," the investigator said without preamble, sending a file to Foster's secure email. The document was an internal email from Atlantic Skyways' former CEO to Lawrence Donovan, dated 2 years earlier. "Larry, we've received another complaint about Stephanie. This is the 3rd this quarter. I understand she's your daughter, but this pattern is creating liability for the company. The latest incident involved a Nigerian family who is threatening legal action. I strongly recommend she be reassigned to non-passenger duties before something happens that we can't contain." Lawrence's reply was damning. "Handle it like the others. Offer them vouchers, upgrade their status, whatever it takes. If they persist, have legal draw up the usual NDA with a reasonable settlement. My daughter stays in her current position. Need I remind you who convinced the board to approve your compensation package last year?" Foster immediately forwarded the exchange to Letitia with a brief message: "This is the smoking gun." They knew exactly who Stephanie was and what she was capable of doing. They enabled and protected her right up until she broke Jamal's jaw on camera. That evening, Letitia sat with Jamal as he reviewed the emails on a tablet. For the first time in weeks, something shifted in his demeanor. He wrote on his whiteboard with unusual intensity. "They knew she would hurt someone like me eventually. And they let her anyway." Letitia nodded. "Yes, baby. They knew. This isn't just about what she did to me, is it? No. It's about a whole system that decided people who look like us don't deserve the same respect and safety as everyone else." Jamal considered this, then wrote, "I want to testify at the trial. I want to tell my story myself." Letitia felt a complex surge of emotion, pride in her son's courage, fear for the trauma of reliving the experience publicly, hope that speaking his truth might help him heal. "Are you sure? It will be difficult. She'll be there in the courtroom." Jamal nodded firmly, writing, "I'm not afraid of her anymore. I'm angry at the people who gave her power knowing she would abuse it." As the trial date approached, Atlantic Skyways made one final, desperate attempt to prevent the case from reaching the courtroom. They offered a settlement of $25 million, more than 5 times their previous offer. Along with a public admission of fault, a commitment to completely restructure their training protocols, and the resignation of 3 board members, including Lawrence Donovan. Foster presented the offer to Letitia without recommendation. "This decision must come from you and Jamal," he said. "The amount is substantial, enough to secure your family's future for generations. But money cannot buy justice, and only you can decide what justice looks like in this case." Letitia discussed the offer with Jamal, who had recently had his jaw unwired but still spoke carefully through residual pain. His first words after weeks of silence had been, "Are we still going to Disney?" The innocence of the question, contrasted with all they had endured, had brought Letitia to tears. "We can end this now," she told him, explaining the settlement offer. "We can try to put it behind us and rebuild our lives. Or we can go to trial and make sure the whole story is told publicly. It's your choice, Jamal. You're the one who was hurt the most." Jamal thought carefully before answering. "If we take the money and stay quiet, will it stop her from hurting someone else?" Letitia hesitated. "Stephanie has been fired. She probably won't work as a flight attendant again. But what about all the other Stephanies?" Jamal asked, wisdom beyond his years in his eyes. "What about all the other airlines with the same policies? What about the next black kid who just wants to help his sister?" His decision was clear. They would proceed to trial. The surveillance video leaked on a Tuesday morning. Despite court orders sealing evidence until trial, someone, likely an employee at the Atlanta airport, uploaded the complete, unedited footage from the aircraft's security cameras to a social media platform. Within hours, it had been viewed 20 million times. The video left no room for interpretation. It showed, in clinical detail, every microaggression Jamal and his family had endured throughout the flight. It captured Stephanie Donovan's deliberate neglect of their needs while attentively serving white passengers. Most devastating of all, it showed the moment of assault with undeniable clarity, Jamal stumbling slightly from turbulence, Stephanie's disproportionate rage, and the sickening impact as she shoved him into the metal beverage cart. The sound of his jaw breaking was audible even through the plane's ambient noise. America watched. And America reacted. Protesters gathered outside Atlantic Skyway's headquarters in Dallas, their numbers growing from hundreds to thousands within days. Celebrities and athletes posted messages of support for Jamal using the viral hashtag #JusticeForJamal. Civil rights organizations called for a nationwide boycott of the airline. Corporate accounts began dropping Atlantic Skyways en masse, with major companies issuing statements about their commitment to supporting businesses that aligned with their values of diversity and inclusion. The airline's stock plummeted 28% in a single week. For Stephanie Donovan, the video's release transformed her from a controversial figure to a national pariah. Recognized in a grocery store, she was confronted by angry shoppers who followed her to her car, recording her on their phones while chanting, "Child abuser." Her home address was doxed online, forcing her to temporarily relocate. Her father, Lawrence Donovan, found his hotel empire facing collateral damage as protesters targeted his properties with boycotts and negative reviews. Business associates distanced themselves, canceling long-standing partnerships and joint ventures. Atlantic Skyways, desperate to contain the growing crisis, announced Stephanie's termination and issued a carefully worded apology that acknowledged unacceptable behavior, without explicitly admitting liability. They unveiled a new Respect in the Skies initiative, promising comprehensive retraining for all staff and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. The public wasn't impressed. "Too little, too late," commented civil rights leader Reverend Marcus Johnson during a television interview. "This isn't about one bad apple flight attendant. This is about a corporate culture that enabled and concealed racist behavior until they were caught on camera." Meanwhile, Jamal Thompson faced a grueling recovery process far from the public eye. 6 weeks after the assault, his jaw remained wired shut. Unable to speak or eat solid food, he received nutrition through protein shakes and pureed foods consumed through a straw. The physical pain, while substantial, paled in comparison to the psychological trauma. Nightmares plagued his sleep, vivid dreams where he was trapped on an endless flight, unable to escape as threats closed in around him. He developed anxiety around white authority figures, flinching when doctors or police officers came near him. Once outgoing and eager to share his knowledge about everything from astronomy to sports, Jamal now communicated primarily through brief written notes, withdrawn into a protective shell of silence. The therapist Foster had diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. "He blames himself," Letitia confided to Foster during a private meeting. He keeps writing notes asking if Zora still would have had her accident if he hadn't tried to help her. If we would still have gone to Disney if he had just stayed in his seat. Foster shook his head sadly. Self-blame is common among trauma victims, especially children. They try to make sense of senseless acts by assuming responsibility. It gives them the illusion of control. How do I help him understand it wasn't his fault? Therapy is crucial, but so is seeing justice done. Children have an innate sense of fairness. Seeing Stephanie Donovan held accountable may help Jamal process what happened to him. Letitia's own struggles mounted as well. Her hospital officially terminated her employment, citing excessive unexcused absences, despite Foster's efforts to invoke family medical leave protections. The loss of income, combined with mounting medical bills not covered by their insurance, created financial pressure that added to her stress. The media attention brought unwelcome intrusions into their lives. Reporters camped outside their secured apartment building. Tabloids published speculative articles about Letitia's past, including her divorce and bankruptcy. Conservative commentators questioned her motives, suggesting she had coached Jamal to provoke the incident for financial gain. Most painful of all was the impact on 8-year-old Zora. Once bubbly and outgoing, she now suffered from severe separation anxiety, refusing to leave her mother's side even momentarily. She developed a fear of public restrooms, associated with the traumatic catalyst of the incident. Night terrors disrupted her sleep, leaving her exhausted and irritable during the day. Her school performance, previously excellent, plummeted. Teachers reported that she couldn't focus in class and burst into tears when asked about her brother or their aborted Disney trip. The child psychologist diagnosed her with secondary trauma. Psychological injury sustained not from direct harm but from witnessing harm to a loved one. Both of my children are suffering, Letitia told Judge Washington during his visit to their apartment. And for what? Because we dared to fly while black. Because Jamal asked for a drink? Because Zora needed to use the bathroom? For nothing, the judge replied solemnly. There is no justification, no explanation that makes any sense of what happened to your family. But there can be accountability, and through that, perhaps some healing. The Thompson family's ordeal had triggered something larger than themselves. As news of the case spread, other victims of Stephanie Donovan began coming forward, breaking non-disclosure agreements to share similar experiences of discrimination and mistreatment. Melissa Rodriguez described how Stephanie had berated her family for speaking Spanish during a flight in 2019, threatening to have them removed from the aircraft for making other passengers uncomfortable. Dr. Amir Patel revealed that Stephanie had deliberately spilled hot coffee on his elderly mother during a flight in 2017, then claimed it was turbulence despite the smooth flying conditions. When he complained to the airline, he was offered vouchers and a non-disclosure agreement. James Washington, no relation to the judge, shared how Stephanie had accused his 14-year-old son of stealing another passenger's headphones in 2020, subjecting him to a humiliating public search despite the actual owner later finding them in an overhead bin. His family received a settlement and signed an NDA. Each story followed the same pattern: discriminatory treatment, clear racial targeting, complaints to the airline, and then settlements contingent on silence. A pattern that had allowed Stephanie to continue her behavior unchecked for years, protected by her father's influence and the company's desire to avoid negative publicity. Foster's investigation revealed another disturbing aspect of Atlantic Skyways operations, an internal program called Passenger Profile Optimization. Supposedly designed to enhance customer experience, the system flagged passengers based on factors including race, apparent socioeconomic status, and English proficiency, guiding crew members on how to appropriately allocate attention and resources. In practice, this created a two-tier service model: preferential treatment for white, affluent-appearing passengers and minimal service for everyone else, particularly passengers of color traveling in economy class. The discovery of this program transformed the Thompson case from an individual incident of assault to evidence of systemic discrimination institutionalized within corporate policy. It also attracted the attention of federal regulators, who launched an investigation into whether Atlantic Skyways had violated civil rights laws in its treatment of passengers. As public pressure mounted and legal challenges multiplied, the airline's crisis deepened. Unable to stem the financial bleeding from boycotts and cancelled corporate accounts, Atlantic Skyways announced layoffs of 2,000 employees. Their CEO resigned, citing personal reasons, though industry insiders confirmed he had been forced out by the board. Lawrence Donovan fought desperately to protect his daughter and his investment, using his considerable influence to pressure media outlets into balanced coverage and politicians into public statements supporting the airline. He hired a top crisis management firm to rehabilitate Stephanie's image, positioning her as an overwhelmed working mother who made a split-second error in judgment. The strategy backfired spectacularly when journalists discovered Stephanie had previously been fired from 2 other airlines for similar incidents, only to have the records expunged through her father's legal team and financial pressure. 7 weeks after the assault, as the case moved inexorably toward trial, Foster received an unexpected call from his investigator. "You need to see this immediately," the investigator said without preamble, sending a file to Foster's secure email. The document was an internal email from Atlantic Skyways' former CEO to Lawrence Donovan, dated 2 years earlier. "Larry, we've received another complaint about Stephanie. This is the 3rd this quarter. I understand she's your daughter, but this pattern is creating liability for the company. The latest incident involved a Nigerian family who is threatening legal action. I strongly recommend she be reassigned to non-passenger duties before something happens that we can't contain." Lawrence's reply was damning. "Handle it like the others. Offer them vouchers, upgrade their status, whatever it takes. If they persist, have legal draw up the usual NDA with a reasonable settlement. My daughter stays in her current position. Need I remind you who convinced the board to approve your compensation package last year?" Foster immediately forwarded the exchange to Letitia with a brief message: "This is the smoking gun." They knew exactly who Stephanie was and what she was capable of doing. They enabled and protected her right up until she broke Jamal's jaw on camera. That evening, Letitia sat with Jamal as he reviewed the emails on a tablet. For the first time in weeks, something shifted in his demeanor. He wrote on his whiteboard with unusual intensity. "They knew she would hurt someone like me eventually. And they let her anyway." Letitia nodded. "Yes, baby. They knew. This isn't just about what she did to me, is it? No. It's about a whole system that decided people who look like us don't deserve the same respect and safety as everyone else." Jamal considered this, then wrote, "I want to testify at the trial. I want to tell my story myself." Letitia felt a complex surge of emotion, pride in her son's courage, fear for the trauma of reliving the experience publicly, hope that speaking his truth might help him heal. "Are you sure? It will be difficult. She'll be there in the courtroom." Jamal nodded firmly, writing, "I'm not afraid of her anymore. I'm angry at the people who gave her power knowing she would abuse it." As the trial date approached, Atlantic Skyways made one final, desperate attempt to prevent the case from reaching the courtroom. They offered a settlement of $25 million, more than 5 times their previous offer. Along with a public admission of fault, a commitment to completely restructure their training protocols, and the resignation of 3 board members, including Lawrence Donovan. Foster presented the offer to Letitia without recommendation. "This decision must come from you and Jamal," he said. "The amount is substantial, enough to secure your family's future for generations. But money cannot buy justice, and only you can decide what justice looks like in this case." Letitia discussed the offer with Jamal, who had recently had his jaw unwired but still spoke carefully through residual pain. His first words after weeks of silence had been, "Are we still going to Disney?" The innocence of the question, contrasted with all they had endured, had brought Letitia to tears. "We can end this now," she told him, explaining the settlement offer. "We can try to put it behind us and rebuild our lives. Or we can go to trial and make sure the whole story is told publicly. It's your choice, Jamal." You're the one who was hurt the most. Jamal thought carefully before answering. If we take the money and stay quiet, will it stop her from hurting someone else? Letitia hesitated. Stephanie has been fired. She probably won't work as a flight attendant again. But what about all the other Stephanies? Jamal asked, wisdom beyond his years in his eyes. What about all the other airlines with the same policies? What about the next black kid who just wants to help his sister? His decision was clear. They would proceed to trial. 1 year after the verdict, Jamal Thompson stood before a different audience. No longer in a courtroom but in the auditorium of his new school in Charlotte, he addressed his fellow students with the confidence of someone who had found his voice through adversity. Before I was assaulted, I didn't fully understand what racism looked like, he told the rapt audience of middle schoolers. I knew it existed from history books and my mom's warnings, but I thought it was mostly about people saying mean things or not getting invited to parties. I didn't understand how it could be built into systems and policies in ways that aren't always visible until they hurt you. The assault that had broken his jaw had also broken open a national conversation. The record-setting verdict against Atlantic Skyways had sent shockwaves through the airline industry and beyond, forcing companies to examine their own practices and policies. The Thompson family had indeed received justice, though the path had not been straightforward. Atlantic Skyways initially appealed the verdict, but facing bankruptcy from the massive judgment and the continuing boycott of their services, they ultimately negotiated a settlement, payment of the full compensatory damages, a reduced but still substantial punitive award, and most significantly, a commitment to structural reforms monitored by an independent civil rights commission. Stephanie Donovan had not escaped accountability. Found guilty of felony assault on a minor with hate crime enhancements, she had been sentenced to 4 years in prison. Her father's influence, once sufficient to erase consequences for her actions, had crumbled in the face of irrefutable video evidence and public outrage. Lawrence Donovan had been forced to resign from Atlantic Skyways' board of directors and had sold his ownership stake at a significant loss. His hotel empire had suffered as well, with several major chains cutting ties with his properties after the full extent of his role in enabling discrimination became public. For the Thompson family, the aftermath of the verdict had brought both healing and new purpose. Letitia had used part of the settlement to establish the Thompson Justice Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating discrimination in transportation and public accommodations. The foundation provided legal support to victims of discrimination who lacked resources to fight corporate giants alone. What happened to Jamal wasn't unique, Letitia explained in an interview with a major news network. What was unique was having a federal judge witness it and having the resources to pursue justice. Most victims don't have those advantages, and their stories go untold. We're changing that. The foundation had already supported 15 cases against various transportation providers, securing both compensation for victims and commitments to policy changes. Letitia had found her calling as an advocate, leaving nursing to work full-time on expanding the foundation's reach. Zora, now 9 years old, had slowly recovered from the trauma of witnessing her brother's assault. Therapy had helped her process her feelings of guilt for needing the bathroom, the innocent catalyst for the violence that followed. She had become passionate about children's rights, starting a kids' advocacy group at her school and speaking to other children about standing up for themselves and each other. And Jamal, whose broken jaw had become a symbol of both injustice and resilience, had transformed from victim to activist. After multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy, he could speak normally again, though a slight asymmetry in his smile remained, a permanent reminder of what he had endured. Rather than hiding this physical mark, Jamal had embraced it as part of his story. He had become a sought-after speaker at schools across the country, using his experience to help other young people understand both the reality of discrimination and the importance of standing against it. The airline industry had undergone significant changes as well. The Federal Aviation Administration, prompted by the revelations from the Thompson case, had launched investigations into discriminatory practices at major carriers. New regulations required airlines to provide detailed data on passenger complaints involving potential discrimination and to implement verifiable training programs for all customer-facing staff. A congressional hearing on discrimination in commercial aviation had featured testimony from multiple former passengers who had experienced treatment similar to the Thompson families. Many had previously been silenced by non-disclosure agreements but came forward after courts ruled that NDAs could not legally prohibit testimony about potential civil rights violations. Judge Terrence Washington, whose documentation had been crucial to securing justice, had been appointed by the president to lead a new judicial task force on transportation discrimination, examining how federal courts could better address systemic inequities in public accommodations. Atlantic Skyways, once a major carrier, had emerged from bankruptcy as a smaller, restructured company with entirely new leadership and a public commitment to being the industry leader in equitable service. Whether this commitment represented genuine change or merely rebranding remained to be seen, but the financial consequences of their previous practices had sent an unmistakable message to the entire industry. 6 months after the verdict, the Thompson family had finally taken their Disney World vacation. Guests of honor at an all-expenses-paid VIP experience arranged by the theme park, which had reached out after learning of their story. Photos of Jamal and Zora beaming beside their favorite Disney characters had gone viral, a heartwarming coda to a story that had begun with violence and pain. On the anniversary of the verdict, Letitia sat in the auditorium watching her son speak to his peers, marveling at his poise and wisdom beyond his 13 years. "The most important thing I learned," Jamal told the students, "is that change happens when people refuse to be silent. One person speaking the truth can start a movement. And sometimes, justice doesn't just mean making things right for yourself, it means making things better for everyone who comes after you." After his presentation, a student asked what advice he would give to kids who experience discrimination. Jamal thought carefully before answering. "Document everything. Find allies who will stand with you. Know that it's not your fault. And remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, it's something no one can take away." As the school day ended, the Thompson family gathered outside. They had a flight to catch, ironically, their first time flying together since the assault. Jamal had insisted he was ready, that facing this fear was important to his continued healing. As they boarded, the flight attendant greeting passengers instantly recognized Jamal from news coverage. "It's an honor to have you on our flight," she said sincerely. "Your courage changed our industry." Settling into their seats, Letitia noticed something different on the safety card in her seat back pocket. Alongside the usual instructions about oxygen masks and exit rows was a new section. Commitment to equitable service, with a clear statement that all passengers were entitled to respectful treatment regardless of race, gender, religion, or ability, along with information on how to report any concerns. This small addition, now standard on all major airlines, was just one of countless ripple effects from what had become known simply as the Thompson case. A single act of discrimination, captured on video and pursued relentlessly through the justice system, had forced a reckoning that extended far beyond one flight attendant or one airline. As their plane taxied for takeoff, Zora clutched her Princess Tiana doll, a new one, as the original had been damaged beyond repair during the traumatic day of Jamal's assault. The symbolism wasn't lost on Letitia, damaged but replaced, carrying the memory of trauma but not defined by it. Jamal looked out the window at the ground crew preparing for departure. "Did you know," he said, resuming his old habit of sharing random facts, "that airplanes are the safest form of transportation? The odds of being in an accident are 1 in 11 million. Letitia smiled, hearing in this simple statement something profound, her son's determination to reclaim joy, knowledge, and normalcy from the shadow of trauma. To fly again, literally and figuratively. The verdict had brought justice, the settlement had brought security, but this moment, Jamal excited about flying again, Zora clutching her doll without fear, both children moving forward with resilience and purpose, this was healing. As the plane lifted into the sky, Letitia thought about the long journey they had traveled since that fateful flight. From victim to advocate, from trauma to testimony, from broken to rebuilt, never the same, but somehow stronger. What had begun with a flight attendant's act of racism had transformed into a movement for accountability and change. And while one family's story had captured national attention, the true measure of its impact would be in the countless untold stories, the discriminatory encounters that would never happen because systems had been changed, the children who would be treated with dignity because one boy and his mother had refused to be silenced. Justice, Letitia reflected, was not just about punishment for wrongdoing. It was about transformation, of individuals, institutions, and society itself. The broken pieces of their lives had been reassembled into something purposeful and powerful, a mosaic more beautiful and meaningful than what had existed before. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the captain's voice came over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached 35,000 feet. You're free to move about the cabin." Free. The word resonated with layers of meaning for the Thompson family. Free from fear. Free from silence. Free to move forward into a future they were helping to shape. It had been a long, painful journey from that moment when Jamal's blood dripped onto an airplane carpet to this moment of soaring above the clouds. But through it all, they had held on to the truth, and in the end, that truth had not only set them free but had helped liberate countless others as well. What do you think about the Thompson family's fight for justice? Would you have had the courage to refuse the settlement offers and push for a full trial like they did? Comment below with your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if you found it inspiring. Justice isn't always swift, but as Jamal's story shows, speaking truth to power can create lasting change that benefits many. Thanks for watching, and remember, one voice speaking truth can start a movement that transforms an entire industry. This powerful story illuminates how racism operates not just through individual actions but through systems designed to protect perpetrators and silence victims. Jamal's experience shows that discrimination often goes unchallenged because institutions prioritize reputation over accountability. The Thompson family teaches us that standing firm in the truth, even when faced with intimidation and lucrative settlements, can create change beyond one's personal circumstances. True justice isn't merely punishing wrongdoers but transforming broken systems. It requires courage from victims to speak out and allies who use their privilege to amplify marginalized voices, as Judge Washington did. It also demonstrates that documentation is crucial. Without evidence, discrimination is easily denied or diminished. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals that healing from racial trauma doesn't mean forgetting or minimizing what happened. For Jamal, healing meant reclaiming his voice, converting pain into purpose, and ensuring his suffering created safer spaces for others. His journey reminds us that while we cannot prevent every instance of discrimination, we can choose how we respond, whether we accept unjust systems or work to dismantle them, whether we settle for personal compensation or insist on collective transformation. What would you have done in the Thompson family's position? Would you have accepted the airline's settlement offers for financial security, or would you have pursued justice through trial like Jamal and Letitia did? Drop a comment below with your thoughts on their decision and what you might have done differently. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but stayed silent out of fear or uncertainty? Or have you been like Judge Washington, stepping up to document and support someone facing injustice? Share your experience and how it changed you. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories about people standing up against systemic racism and fighting for justice. Every share helps spread awareness about how discrimination continues to affect lives daily and what we can do to combat it. Thank you for watching this journey of courage, resilience, and transformation. Remember, as Jamal discovered, one voice speaking truth can ignite a movement that changes entire systems.